Okay, welcome, book lovers. Welcome to another episode of Authors Love Bookstores presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensel-Lorance, and I'm your host today. If you are joining us for the first time, let me take a moment to explain what A Mighty Blaze is. We are a volunteer effort of writers and creatives who love books and storytelling and authors and bookstores. We work to bring attention to these essential parts of our culture during COVID-19 and beyond. Today's show is Authors Love Bookstores. It's a weekly online program that I host and produce in conjunction with fellow writer Joe Moldover. Our goal is to highlight authors and their wonderful books, and we also talk with independent bookstores across the US and Canada to tell you what makes them so special and what you can do to support their continued survival. We do this by speaking with booksellers and with the authors who love and appreciate their stores. If you're watching live with us on Facebook, feel free to post a question for our guests in a comment below the broadcast, and my colleague Sarah will bring them to our attention so we can ask our guests your queries. We're so excited. I'm so excited for today's episode. I've been really looking forward to talking with our guests, and I am a big fan, and so that's even better. And so let me tell you who is with us today. Welcome to Anne Napolitano. Anne is the best-selling author of Dear Edward, and as well as other books. And we're going to talk a little bit about Dear Edward today. Welcome, Anne. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you for having me.
And then also with us is Stephanie Valdez. Stephanie is the co-owner of the Community Bookstore and Terrace Bookstore, both of which are in Brooklyn. Welcome, Stephanie. We're happy you are here as well.
Thanks for having me.
So let me tell you a little bit of bio about Anne and Stephanie before we begin. So as I mentioned, Anne is the author of best-selling book Dear Edward. She also is the author of two other novels. Dear Edward was described, I was reading a review, and Dear Edward was described as propulsive, fearless, graceful, and powerful. I would add beautiful. I finished rereading it for the second time last night, and it's really, it's such a beautiful story, and I love spending time in it. Dear Edward was named one of the best books of 2020 by the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Real Simple, Fast Company, Women's World, Parade, I Need to Take Another Breath, listing all of the places, Library Reads, and Amazon. It debuted #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. It was an editor's choice of the New York Times Book Review. It was a Read with Jenna book club pick for the Today Show. And then Barnes & Noble, Book a Million, Book of the Month, Indie Next Pick, Library Reads, Amazon all chose it as best book to read, and they have all different book clubs that they encouraged reading Dear Edward as well. Anne has written two previous novels, A Good Hard Look and Within Arm's Reach. She was also the associate editor of One Story Literary Magazine, and I have all my One Stories on my desk. And also has taught fiction for Brooklyn College, for New York University, and for Gotham Writers Workshop. And she was also longlisted for the Simpson Joyce Carol Oates Literary Prize. Welcome. And then Stephanie, as I mentioned, is the co-owner of the Community Bookstore, which is in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and then Terrace Bookstore, which is in Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn. Community Bookstore was founded in 1971. It is the oldest independent bookstore in Brooklyn, and is, from what I understand, a beloved institution. And it is a must-visit spot. You have a garden, a rare outdoor space in your bookstore. I'm not sure we've had a bookstore on the show before that had an outdoor garden, so we're gonna have to talk about that too. So welcome to both of you. So excited that you're here. And when we invited you, we asked our authors to nominate a bookstore that they'd like to talk to, and you selected Community Bookstore as one of your favorite indies. I'm sure you visited many independent bookstores over the years. What makes this store so special to you?
Well, it is my independent bookstore. It's the closest to my house. I mean, living in Brooklyn, you're like spoiled for independent bookstores, and in New York City, it's really amazing. And I love that so much. But Community Bookstore is the one that's like 4 blocks from my house, where I buy all my kids' books, where I go with my kids. We go there for readings. I worked at One Story for many years, and I'm still involved with One Story. And every summer we do a summer conference, and we have a reading at in conjunction with Community Bookstore and at Community Bookstore. My kids love it. There's like a piano in the back. It has the a back garden that used to have turtles in the like little pond that was back there. There's a cat. It's like right out of a movie bookstore, you know, like it's, just it's small and like perfect, and you know, like the lighting is perfect, and they have a really wonderful children's selection. Everybody there knows what they're talking about for books, like amazing suggestions. Usually I'm asking for kid suggestions and they're always like really spot on. Um, it's just it's very much like in the center of Park Slope as well. So like you pass it on your way to everything, and everyone I know goes there, and I've been to many readings there. It's just like it's like my home bookstore, and
Mm.
it's great.
So it's your home bookstore and it's perfect and it has turtles.
Yeah, what more could you ask for?
And excellent book suggestions. Stephanie, have you ever heard anyone describe your bookstore as perfect before?
That's a really lovely thing to say, and like hard to live up to. I'm almost glad you can't see it right now, because right now it's like a warehouse. It's like
Well,
piled with boxes and packing material. So I'm hoping that we can just like get it back to its, immaculate state before we let everyone in. But I mean, I didn't create community bookstores, so I can say that I fell in love with it too. It really has its own charm. You like wander through this like slightly dark, cozy bookstore, and then suddenly you're like in this back room with a garden and a piano, and um, you know, there's a turtle in the pond. It just feels like there's that sense of unfolding discovery is really, to me, what's special about the physical space. And the cat has retired, I should say. He um, was just ready to, he was just getting, after some health problems, he was feeling a little cranky. And so we decided it was best if he went home with Ezra, my co-owner. So luckily that was right before the pandemic hit. So he was already adjusted to life at home before all of that happened. But we still do have one turtle in the back. So.
And the turtle's fine in the winter, and that's pretty cool.
Oh.
It always gives us a lot of worry, because we have to just like rely on nature to work itself out. But he essentially hibernates through the winter, and then sometime around April he just emerges for the first time, and that really feels for us, that's like the first call of spring, is when the turtle pops his head out.
That's cool.
I love this description of your store as a place of unfolding discovery. That's really beautiful.
I think it's interesting too, because there's so many writers that live in Brooklyn, that one of the things that I like about it that's amusing to me is that the people, they're completely unfazed by authors because there's like authors that so many in the neighborhood that that's their bookstore. So like it's not special. It's like part of the world, which is nice too. It's like that, that books and
I mean,
people write them, and
we are sort of adapted to it. I think for better, for worse.
Yeah.
Sometimes when new people come, they do sort of like freeze for others. So usually we try to make sure that they like play it cool once they get there, at a certain point. But we are really lucky to be in community with an incredible group of people who are writing books, who are reading and reviewing books, who are thinking critically about books, and that is all part of the dialogue that happens in and around our store.
Now, can you explain the relationship between Community Bookstore and Terrace Bookstore?
Well, after we took on one fixer-upper store, when we took over Community Bookstore, it was sort of a wild place. It had too many animals. There were 2 dogs, 2 cats, a bearded dragon, 2 turtles, and a bunny. And the store was a mess. It was financially a total wreck. And our friend left the country to go live in Albania. And we sort of agreed to take it over. And we took some time and it was a fixer-upper. Every week we would like throw out an old sofa or like dust a gross corner. And over time we sort of got it to a state where we were happy with things. And then Ezra got a call from a used bookstore in my neighborhood in Windsor Terrace that the owner really she was operating it by herself. She was completely overwhelmed. She was practically like bricked in with books. When you walked in the door, you couldn't see her. She was just covered in stacks and piles of books. So anyway, we walked in and I had fully planned to just find somebody else to take over the bookstore. And then I walked in and I was like, oh, okay, I mean, I sort of know what we're getting into, but not. So anyway, long story short, we took over Terrace Books, and that was another whole fixer-upper project. And then you know, that one is kind of a special store too, because it's also my neighborhood bookstore. So it's the store my kids grown up in, and so it's sort of I joked before, it's sort of like my second child that I have fewer photos of, but it has its own, it's even smaller and even more kind of improbable. Like you're just walking down a random street and there's a bookstore. And I think a lot of people feel a huge sense of connection to it because of its, you know, it's not in the heart of Park Slope. It's sort of like on a, it's like 2 blocks out of the way and not on a street that many people walk down. And I think that's what makes it special in its own way.
I think every parent understands that analogy, right? Of like the second child with the not as many photos. I think we understand. So they're siblings, Terrace Bookstore and
Exactly.
Bookstore. They're siblings, actually, both in Brooklyn. So perfect for people to visit both of them next time they're in town. Now, and one of the reasons why we want to have you on the show today is because the paperback of Dear Edward, which Stephanie has, I have the hardcover, but Stephanie has the paperback, just came out. Congratulations. You know, I had such a reaction when I told friends and colleagues that you were on the show today. Everyone's response was, "Oh, I love that book." Everyone said that. So I feel like everyone has read your book. But on the off chance there's someone watching today who has not yet read this wonderful book, can you tell us a little bit about Dear Edward?
Sure. It is about a 12-year-old boy named Edward who is the sole survivor of a plane crash. And basically the book has 2 storylines. The first chapter of the book is Edward and his family. He has a brother and his parents who are boarding the flight at Newark Airport. And you get to know a couple other passengers that are on the flight as well. And at the end of the first chapter, I'm not giving it, this is not a spoiler, the flight takes off. And then the beginning of the second chapter is later that same day when the flight has crashed. And Edward is the only survivor. And so for the rest of the book, it alternates like that. We go through the arc of the plane journey, the whole plane flight, and then in alternating chapters, we're finding out how Edward went on after surviving everyone else on the plane. He's adopted by his aunt and uncle and brought to their home in New Jersey. And it spans about 6 years from when he's 12 till about he's 18. And what he goes through in trying to sort of like re-inhabit a life that he lost most of.
I was mentioning to Anne before we went live that I reread Dear Edward this past week in anticipation, and I cried as much reading the book for the second time as I did the first time, and even though I knew how it ended. And I think that speaks to the deep emotional resonance of the book. It's so powerful, his story, this loss and the hope. What's been the reaction as you go out and talk to readers? Do they all cry like I do? Like I did? Do you find that people, like, what is it that connects them so deeply to Edward and his story?
Yeah, a lot of people cry. It's been interesting because the book came out, I was so lucky, the book came out last January. So I was able to launch the book and I got to like go on the Today Show, which is, you know, like unthinkable. And, you know, go to bookstores and do a tour for 2 months. And then of course the world shut down. And then everything that I received has been online, which is kind of weird because it's like, feels like it's kind of happening in your head because you never go anywhere and like have people, you know, like talk to, I'm always with my family and, you know, it's just very odd. But I've gotten all these letters and messages. It seems I wasn't interested in writing a book about a plane crash, even though it's about a plane crash. It was whether this boy would be able to find a way back to living after something so terrible happened to him. And terrible things happen to all of us, not hopefully on the scale of what happens to Edward, but whether it's a parent's death or a divorce or, or clinical depression, or, something takes us and like sort of cracks our life in half.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can see it, sometimes it's public, and sometimes it's not. And I'm interested in how we get through, like how we move through that, and how it like can deepen our humanity as opposed to break us. And so I think that's what resonates with people in the book, because to me, that's where the heart of the book lies. And I really didn't know it was inspired by a real plane crash.
Yes.
There was in 2010, there was a flight from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. And there was only one survivor, and it was a 9-year-old Dutch boy. And they found him about a half-mile away from the rest of the wreckage, still buckled into his airplane seat. And he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise totally fine. And everyone else in the flight, including his parents and his brother, had died immediately. And I just was obsessed with that story. And this idea that all the stories, the news stories about this crash showed the same image of the little boy, and he was in his hospital bed, and he had a bandage around his head, and his eyes were closed, and he was a beautiful little boy. And I would just look at him. He was 9. And I was just think, how is that little boy going to be able to get out of that hospital bed and walk out of that hospital without his mom and his dad and his brother? Like, how is that? Like, how can we expect anyone to be able to do that, much less, have a Wednesday or go to a new school or like make a friend? And I really didn't know if it was possible. So like in a way I wrote it, I didn't know whether Edward was going to be okay. I had to like go with him step by step in the story to see where I went. So it wasn't like I had a prescribed ending. But it was like my own like feeling it out um, page by page to see where he ended up. And like that emotional journey seems to be what people are drawn to.
Oh, that's interesting. So you didn't plot out the book or outline out the book. This is the ending, and write to that. You let Edward tell you the story, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I knew, so obviously because I knew it was a plane crash. I knew,
I mean, that part.
the plane was going to crash. Thank God. That was very helpful. The first year, it took me 8 years to write it. I historically have been extremely slow. And the first year I didn't write. I just did research and took notes and thought about it. And I knew what I thought I knew was that the last page was going to be Edward being found in the wreckage saying, "I'm here, I'm here." So I knew I was writing to that. I didn't actually know whose point of view that was going to be in. I thought it would be Edward, and it turned out it was the paramedic who saved him. But I didn't know where Edward was going to go after the crash, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
the plane actually was for me much easier to write because it had a beginning, middle, and end. Once I knew who the characters were, they're trapped in a metal bus. There's only so many things that can happen when you're trapped in a metal bus.
Yeah.
But anything could have happened to him on the ground after something that catastrophic happens to his life. So that took all the rewriting.
Fascinating. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience, and people wanted to know about the inspiration for the story. So thank you for answering that. Many people are commenting that they loved your book, they read it, they shared it with friends, their book clubs read it. So lots of enthusiasm. And then we had someone say that they didn't realize that you lived in Brooklyn and wanted to know if you are a lifelong Brooklynite. Is that the right word? Brooklynite? Brooklyn?
No, I went to graduate school at NYU for fiction writing like a million years ago, and I've been in New York since then. So I've been in Brooklyn. I've been in Park Slope since my younger son was in kindergarten, and he's 11. So 6 years in Brooklyn. Prior to that, I lived in Manhattan for like 15 years or something like that. But I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I'm actually in my mother's house in northern New Jersey right now. We wanted to leave our small apartment.
Yay for you. Great. So Stephanie, you were talking also before we went live about the fact that the bookstore is closed for browsing, but not for sales, and people are buying books. Sounds like a good amount of books. And how are you facilitating the the art of book recommendations, because that's one of the things about independent bookstores that's like just magical, is the way that booksellers can match readers with books. How do you do that in a COVID environment?
That's such a good question. I think in the beginning it was a struggle. At the beginning, we were actually all working from home and the physical bookstore was shuttered. So we were doing everything from our website. So we definitely tried to make sure we had some books on our website, on the landing page that were really things we were excited by and enthused by. I think virtual events became early on a way for us to reach out to people and tell them what we were excited to read or think about. I think virtual events were a complete surprise to us. At first, we thought it was just something we had to do, just to kind of reschedule things and try to salvage what we could for authors. But then we were quickly surprised by how much we enjoyed them. And we were able to, have people from all over the world tune into some of our programs instead of just people just around us. And that was really encouraging and inspiring. And I mean, a couple of the ones in the beginning, I think partially because of that early quarantine feel, I would have, friends tuning in from all over the world, texting me about an event. And that sense of community felt like something that that I just didn't expect to find in all of this.
Yeah.
So that's one way that the art of bookselling sort of survived. In June, we were able to reopen our physical space, and we have sort of a setup at the door where we have at Community Bookstore, we have a table that's there for browsing. At Terrace Books, we have a sort of big window display. And then I was telling Anne before this call, people come to the door and they ask us things. So instead of shopping themselves and sort of browsing, now it's a very person-to-person situation. So people would come to me and say, these are the last 5 books I read. What would you recommend? Or people would say, my kid is done with this series and I desperately need 4 more books to get them through this next month. And so that's where bookselling became really personal and hands-on again. And, masked, distanced, kind of personal. And so it wasn't the same, but it was great in its own way. And going through the holidays, we helped people with people came to the door with their long lists of like every kid in their family to buy books for. And we appreciated all of it. It's still a challenge. We're still, we take orders in through our website and on the phone and in person at the door. And that's always a struggle to try to get the books people want. But it's working. I think people really want to be reading books and they want a stack of books to explore physically, and bringing new books into your home is a way to escape the tedium of the quarantine. So we've been excited to be able to bring books to people.
Have you ever been stumped by a customer
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
All the
I mean, I
time.
shouldn't admit that. I mean, most of the time it's someone looking for an exact repeat reading experience. It's sort of like if somebody came to me and asked me for an exact, I just read Dear Edward, I want the exact reading experience. Like, it's difficult. So would you find something that was, would you zero in on Edward as the protagonist? Would you zoom in on something that somebody kind of dealing with an extreme loss? Would you deal with also the structure of the book is just in terms of like a very complex narrative structure, the duality of the 2 timelines? Like, which part would you zoom in on?
Yeah.
So I think, and maybe you have an exact answer, Anne, of like the other, but it's difficult. I think sometimes that's where you just ask a lot of questions and try to get to what they actually want. For me, I think the ones that stump me are usually in genres where I don't have like a deep bench of suggestions. Sometimes teenagers stump me a lot because I think it feels like the stakes are very high and teenagers are their own unique blend. And there's always the question of like what level of adult content you sort of want to give them. Funny books, I'm not always so big on funny books, so some years there just aren't a lot of funny books. So those are some things that regularly stump me, or when people have very specific questions.
Your comment about the structure of Dear Edward is something I was going to ask you, Anne, about. I actually thought, the first time I read the book, I'm sure, like a lot of people, I was so caught up in the story. And I imagine on a subconscious level, I was thinking about structure. But it wasn't until the second time when I knew the ending, so I could breathe a little easier. Though I still cried, of course. I really spent a lot of time thinking about the structure of the book. The two timelines is just such a clever way of presenting the content, because you're allowing us to be in Edward's shoes as he goes on this journey, but also kind of pull out the crash along the whole book, almost to manage our heartbreak. I don't know if you thought, I'm so curious about how you came up with that structure, and what was the inspiration behind it? Was it immediate to you that that's how the book should be, or did it take some work to get there?
No, that was immediate. It was one of the few things that I knew right away, and I didn't 100% know why at the time. I think that it was because um, two things. One, I felt like if something that catastrophic happened to a person, then what happened that day for Edward always has as much weight inside of him as the life that he's living now. It's something that he carries with him. The weight of it is this weight that he's going to carry with him for the rest of his life. It's not something that he's going to be able to set down. And obviously part of his journey is learning to bear that weight. So it felt right to me that they were sort of 50% of the book. And then also I want it to be because the lives on that plane are just as vital and real and true as of course, this is all fiction, as the lives of the people on the ground. So whereas like we're programmed to be like, well, the people who lived are more, are still alive are more important. But for Edward, and in truth, they're not, so by putting them next to each other and they're both in the present tense, they got to share that. And then, of course, that also allowed me to sort of braid the ending, and it allowed some kind of like a rhythm to the book that culminated. And I didn't plan this at all, but of course, the initial when you're on a flight that's going to crash and nobody knows that that's going to happen, you're living your normal. Everybody on that plane is fine and they're happy. And whereas at the beginning of the book, Edward is devastated. And then as you get towards the end of the book, when things are getting rocky on the plane, he's growing lighter because he's further away from it. So they actually trade weight as well. I didn't plan that. That's just something I could see in retrospect, but that made it work, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's impressive. That was something, that structure was something that you knew so clearly at the beginning.
Yeah, it was just interesting to me. Like there was something about like the people that are dead are still alive, like I just wanted to play with that in some kind of a way that I couldn't really articulate.
That's great. Thank you for explaining that. Stephanie, as a bookseller, what do you do when you go into other bookstores? This is a terrible segue. It's like something very deep to something not as deep. But when you're in another bookstore, do you rearrange the shelves? Do you like twitch because the children's section doesn't have a piano and turtle? Like what kind of a book buyer are you? A book shopper in other bookstores, or can you not go in another bookstore?
Well, first of all, it's been a while. I would love to go to another bookstore. Ooh, I think it's a combination. I think definitely when you're in another bookstore, there is part of you that's always thinking of like, oh, look at that display. Look how they managed that, or like look at this little nook and how inviting they made it, or the lighting is really nice over here. You definitely find things that you don't agree with. I don't agree with how that section is shelved. I don't agree with like what category that book is in. But I love bookstores. I think my vacation bookstore would mostly be a used bookstore, which when we took over Terrace Books, it was almost all used. And we tried to kind of keep it both a new and used bookstore for a long time. I think the pandemic has like made it so we're basically only a new bookstore. But I fell in love with used and rare books in a very particular way. And I think for me, I'm always chasing really nice editions of books that are already on my shelves. when I read a paperback, I'm terrible. I dog ear pages. I like write in my books. I know you probably get some comments in the chat about this.
Stephanie.
There's like this classic thing of like, what kind of bookmark do you use? And like, I am like chaotic evil all the way. But that said, I often, if I love a book, and if I, especially like a big long classic that I spend months chewing through, I will often buy like a permanent shelf copy, and I'll usually keep that copy pretty clean. So I'm always chasing like a beautiful, like not not $100 edition, but something in the like $20 to $40 range of something that's like unique and beautiful and special in its own physical way. And so that's the kind of bookstores I love to go to when I'm on vacation, or when I say vacation as though I do that all the time, but I really mean just like when I'm out of my own head and my own world. And those are the bookstores where I can really wander and just find new things.
And do you dog ear books, or do you use a bookmark? I have to ask this question now. I felt like everyone on our show must have been like a pristine bookmark user, but Stephanie has put us, there's another side.
No, I'm like a very prudish reader, and I use a bookmark, and I don't like to, although like if there's right now I'm reading, it depends what the book is for. Like I'm finally reading Swan's Way, the Proust, the first book or whatever in that time series or whatever it's called, which I've been meaning to read for a million years. But like a book like that, I'm reading like a few pages before I start writing every day, because the sentences are so amazing, and it doesn't feel like a plot. I don't even know that it is yet. But so in that, I'm underlining sentences that are amazing, and then I'm actually typing them into a document. Like, so that's like a meditative practice or whatever. So that's different. So that I'm like fully marking up. But in general, I use a bookmark from one of my bookstores that I love, and I never mark up my books.
I will say I kept this book in remarkable shape, and I even used a bookmark. So I am, just to prove I am capable of it. I also like, I leave I have a 4-year-old, and I leave books and a cat, and like I leave books all over the house. So I just have like piles of teetering books that are like this all over. It's terrible. I should say I often read galleys, because publishers send us advance copies. So half the time it's like not even the final copy of the book. And so what I try to do, which I don't always do, is I try, when I really like the book, after I read it in galley, to get a real hardcover copy and put that on my shelf at the end. So.
Okay, so you are a purist.
I mean, just so you don't think I'm like a monster.
I will say that the comments we're getting, people are slightly horrified, but that's okay. But we are getting questions from the audience, which is asking the question that I always ask, which is, what are you reading now? So as a bookseller, what's popular in the store, Stephanie, or what are you reading, or what's coming out this year that you're excited about? And the same thing for you. People want to know what's next, what they should read next, and they're curious what you're spending your time with. Swan's Way, we know, and
an excellent choice, always. Well, I just read a galley for the new Helen Oyeyemi book called Pieces, which comes out in April. I love her. She's a genius. Someday she will write an absolute masterpiece. All of her books are very strange, and I never know where they're going to take me. Literally from page to page, there's almost no sense of where the narrative is going. And so it always feels really thrilling to sort of abandon yourself to one of her novels. And they're funny, they're strange. A lot of them have sort of a fairy tale element to them. This one's a bit of a departure, but it's literally about a train trip. So it's a nice thing to get your head away from whatever your reality is. A few other books I have queued up. One that just came out that is already getting a lot of conversation is the Copenhagen trilogy. This is a kind of already considered a Danish modern classic. And it's ostensibly titled as a memoir, but it's sort of more like auto fiction.
It's not new, right? Isn't it? Wasn't it written quite some time ago, or it's not?
It's not new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was written. I mean, she died in the 70s, so it was, yeah, it was 1969 to 1971. You know, she was a working class Danish woman, and this book takes, this is actually 3 books, and it takes you sort of through her life, and you know, it's a sort of dark path through various marriages, addiction, and the writing is really vivid and immediate and kind of addictive. A writer I really love, Pedro Mairal, he wrote this amazing book that is called The Missing Year of Juan Salvatierra that I love. And this book is coming out in July of 2021 from Bloomsbury. I've actually been waiting for this a long time. It's been published in Spanish years ago, and I do read in Spanish, but I just have been too lazy to do it. So here's the book. And Jhumpa Lahiri has this tiny little novel coming. She wrote it in Italian and then translated it herself because she can do those kind of miraculous things and write a book twice. And okay, one more. The Five Wounds by Kristen Valdez Quaid. It takes place in a small town in New Mexico. And I really liked her story collection that came out a number of years ago. So
Excellent.
there's a big
Thank you.
pile for you.
That's a great pile.
Yes.
And anything?
Yeah, I'm reading, I'm fairly newly into it, but Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi.
Yeah, Jesse. Yeah.
Jesse,
Oh,
yeah.
oh my God, thank you. I love Homegoing so much. And it's really good so far, Transcendent Kingdom. I'm enjoying it. I read, I mean, I guess as many of us have, I've read a lot in the last, 10 months or something, which has been great. But the 2 books I'm kind of the most excited about that I read Deacon King Kong by James McBride last month, and I loved it so much. It was so good. What a wondrous, like, the character development is so luscious and just gorgeous prose and just this like expansive world that with all this like love and heartbeat in it and a real plot where I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. It was so good. It was very, very, very impressive. And I loved Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. That was so good. It just, the writing is exquisite and it was so fascinating to, read about Shakespeare's wife and family, and it was so beautifully done. I was just blown away by that book. I'm looking forward to the new Lauren Groff book that'll come out this year because I really love her writing. I like, I'm also looking forward, I don't know if it's coming out this year, but the next Philip Pullman book from his Darker Materials, the second trilogy. There's the one final book, and I have a friend and I who like text each other every once in a while, been like, when will we have it? Like there's certain books that you're sort of like following along with, and it's an alternate reality that I really want to return to, and that's what fiction is providing, always provides, but this year has really provided it with such like velvety lusciousness that's been so needed.
Velvety lusciousness. What was it like for you to spend time in Edward's story? So you said you took 8 years to write this wonderful book. That's a lot to carry, his loss. I mean, there's a lot of hope in your book as well and resilience, but there's a tremendous amount of loss. What was that like for you as a person to live in that space for so long?
Well, actually, it was a very joyful experience to write the book, which seems counterintuitive and made no sense to me at all for a long time. It was the most joyful writing experience of my life. And part of that is being older and like being able to do things kind of in the page and in the story that I wasn't able to do before. So like some frustrations have been stripped away, which helped. And also like I don't know, a little more chill and like a little more kind to myself, and just I know now I'm here because I love the work. Like I'm here in the story because I love the work. So like I'm gonna let myself love the work. And and which means I'm loving writing it. But also because I was in Edward, like I said, it was his journey that I really had to feel my way through. And one of the things that I realized was one of the only ways that you could possibly be okay if something like that happens to you is if there's a tremendous amount of kindness around you, and particularly for a child. So everyone who stepped towards him, though flawed and human, are coming towards him with kindness. And that felt like incredibly nourishing for me to sit in while I was moving Edward forward. Like I could feel that. So it was kind of like living inside the best of us as humans, even though I was writing about this tremendously sad situation. So I probably wrote that book for a year longer than I should have, because I really didn't want to leave the world.
Oh, what a gift
Yeah.
you gave all of us and also yourself then.
Yeah,
That's really tremendous.
for me, certainly.
I have to imagine it would be hard to leave those characters after like pouring so much sort of like love into each interaction.
Mhm.
I have to say I especially loved, you know, Edward seems to be a kid who sort of struggles to interpret other people's ways and interactions and just their words and their emotions and different social situations. And I loved the way you wrote his sort of home life with his aunt and uncle and the ways that, you know, there's misunderstanding baked in, but a lot of love and caring, and that he comes to realize that these little average things are really acts of extreme love and devotion. Just those tiny nuances just felt so detailed and special and really emotionally true on the page.
No, thank you.
I also was struck this second go around of reading the book with how the book works on the sentence level. Like every sentence is so good. There were several times, and I stopped and I said to myself, wow, like, that's really, really good. And I think that that's something, you know, when you read a good book, like, you know, this book is good, but sometimes you don't always, as a reader, you don't always know how to take it apart to see what makes it so effective. And I think on your book, it's just such a great story. You're not noticing the sentences, right? Because they work so well. It's only upon the reread, when I was looking for that I could spend time and like pull them all out, right? Because they just sing together so beautifully. I don't know. I'm not sure if
That's very nice.
I'm trying to put together a compliment there. I'm not sure it's coming out very well, but I just you know, I was just struck by that. It's just so good.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like part of that is if you take 8 years to do something, then you're rewriting a lot. And if the sentences aren't good, then I should be spoken to.
Still, I mean, you could like overwrite a book, or you could like
Yeah.
you could smooth out all of the things that make it interesting, or so, you know.
Okay.
Time doesn't always heal all
Sure.
things necessarily.
Thank you for saving me, Stephanie. I appreciate it. You mentioned earlier, Anne, that you're writing. You're working on another project. We had some people ask if there's something else that's coming. We had someone ask if Edward's going to appear in another book, or is Edward's story done?
Well, he's not appearing in the book I'm writing now. I thought actually I really had a hard time letting go of them. So my like initial idea for my next project had them in it, because I just like, and my agent was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I sort of, but it was like a part of the reason why for me, if I spend the first year of a project not writing, but thinking and taking notes and doing research, I think that's like the breaking up period as well. So like I over the course of that year, I am finally able to like put down the other world and not sort of drag it into the next one. But I've been really fortunate, because like the luscious velvetyness of like being in another world, I've written more in the last 10 months than I've ever written in my life. So I've written almost the full draft of another book, which for me is like,
Wow.
like
Wow.
Dear Editor took 8 years, and the book before that took 7. So yeah, this book's almost done, you know, it need to be rewritten, etc. But I really was able, it was the place that I've gone. It's like, you know, you can't control this world, and there was so much happening that was so outside of our control, and understanding that having this alternate fictional universe that I'm the god of Even though I don't think about it that way, because I'm not like telling the characters what to do, but I just have spent a tremendous amount of time. Also, we're inside our houses all the time, and I'm not like taking my kid to soccer practice and, you know, all the things that I normally did with everything, all the busyness stripped away. Um, it's been this like wonderful reprieve for me, and very productive. And I've just gotten like completely obsessed with this new book. So I'm
Wonderful.
grateful for that.
Well, it sounds like from our audience, we have many devoted fans who will look forward to when that emerges into the world. We're coming to the end of our time here on Authors Love Bookstores. So before we say goodbye, Stephanie, can you finish this sentence for us? Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
I guess I'll say perseverance. I think that's it.
Feels like the right word for 2020, 2021 for sure. And so Dear Edward is now out in paperback, and we're putting the links below it so you can click over and buy it. This is a great book. If you haven't read it, obviously I want you to read it, and Stephanie and Anne do as well. It's a great book also if you're looking for a gift for someone. I think for a sister or a friend. There's so many wonderful relationships and connections in the story. I think you'll find it resonates with anyone in your life. Perfect for book clubs too. And again, the link will be below where you can buy it from Community Bookstore. And you can find out more about Anne's upcoming events and other opportunities to hear her talk about her books on her website, which is annenapolitano.com. And then Community Bookstore is also online at communitybookstore.net. Thank you both so much for joining us today and for talking with us about your bookstore, your book, Brooklyn. It's been a pleasure to have spent this time with you. So
It was really fun. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Sure. And book lovers, join us back here next week for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you.